There we go. All right. So governance. So the reason, let's go back to the first page. But the reason I wanted to focus on governance is simply because in these webinars, I've been trying to look at some topics or subjects that either are complicated or that look complicated. And I think governance, well, last week, stakeholder management, governance, I think these fall into that category. And it's not that they are objectively complicated. I think there are some complexities, but I think that we often make them much more complicated. And, you know, it can be confusing. So like if you go into almost any guidebook or manual on project management, you end up with stuff like this, you know, and you have a huge number of graphics, diagrams, charts. I mean, look at this. I mean, you know, that is just really difficult to get people to understand and apply. And then the vocabulary, I think, makes it much worse because you talk about sponsors. Oh, does that mean money? Oh, no, it doesn't. Okay, but what does it mean? And oh, in my organization, we talk about sponsors meaning donors. And so there's one complexity. And then if boards and steering groups and committees, is it the same? Is it different? And then there's organizational governance. Is it the same? Is it different? So I think that a lot of these things come together. And I feel that it makes it much more complicated than it needs to be. So what I wanted to do was really to try to go right down to the essence and look at, well, what is governance? And then look at the functions and how we do it. And then look at some top tips. And then I want to link it back to what we looked at last week on stakeholder management and the previous week when we were looking at more agile approaches as well. So does that sound all right, Mahmoud? Oh, I can't hear you. Oh, yeah, there you go. Is that okay? Oh, I can't hear you at all, Mahmoud. Oh, well, if there's anything at all, just put it in the chat. And if there are any questions at any point, just please take the microphone and fire away. It's really not a problem. Okay, so governance, and okay, some people have heard me talk about this before. I mean, you know, we actually have governance all the time in everyday life. It's absolutely normal. In project management, we've made it look like something special, but it isn't. In every sport, you have rules. I mean, this is a children's game for football. You know, it's just a toy, but I mean, it's, you know, you have rules and you have a mechanism for applying rules, but you've also got a mechanism for helping and supporting. I mean, we do this all the time, and all we need to do is to think about what is what are the critical or what are the most no, the core functions of governance. And what I've done, I've just um, I've been thinking about this, and I think I've got it down to these six. And so what I thought, let's look at these, and then we'll see if does this chime in with your experience? Is it something different? But let's have a look. So I think the role that gets forgotten about is support. Who does the project manager go to for support? And I actually think that this is incredibly important because almost by definition, people on a governance structure are more experienced. And if you think about your own working life, how much time would have been saved by somebody senior somebody more experienced, saying, oh, I understand the problem. Why don't you go and speak to this person? And in larger organizations, I think part of that support may also be around navigating the organizational politics and complexities. And if you're new, that can be really difficult. And somebody senior can say, okay, go and speak with that person and let me know. And if necessary, I can help. So that sort of support is, I think, really, really important, and it gets forgotten about. Then there's the obvious one, which is accountability. I know somebody who is a senior, well, he's retired now, but he was a senior IT manager, and he'd been on many, many, many governance structures. And he would start every board meeting with two questions. He would say, should we stop the project? And if not, how do we help the project? Should we fire the project manager? And if not, how do we help? And it seems to me those questions are fundamental, because there is no way that the project itself is going to ask and answer those questions. So if we're going to be accountable, something else must be, and that's governance. And we look at this in a bit more detail as we look at decisions and ownership in a moment. But I think fundamentally governance is about accountability, and it's to make sure that we are doing what we have promised to do. In other words, we are doing the right things and we are doing them in the right way. And again, voice. So this links back last week. We talked about stakeholders. And as we saw, stakeholder management can be quite difficult. Well, again, if you've got a governance structure, they may be more experienced. They may be able to help. They may say, oh, have you thought about this? Or what about this stakeholder? Maybe if a stakeholder is not engaging, they can help. If a stakeholder is not sufficiently or not represented, then the governance structure should be going to the project manager saying, what about Mr. or Mrs. in this organization that I don't think they know anything about this and they're an important stakeholder? So again, accountability, voice, and a lot of times I see project managers being blamed for everything. It's all their fault if it goes wrong. And actually, I think it is the governance structure that owns the project. The project manager and the team are implementing. Absolutely right. Absolutely. But in a football match, if a team loses and loses again and loses again, the person who gets fired is the trainer or the manager or the coach or whatever it's called. And it's because it's the team, collectively own the results, but accountability needs to stop somewhere. And actually, I think it should be the governance structure that is assuming ownership of the project. I like the idea of steering as well. And again, this links back to support and all of the other things. Whether you're steering a car or a boat, it doesn't really matter. You are encouraging a project to move in a certain direction because you're the governance structure, you are more experienced. And then finally, big decisions. Sooner or later, every project has to take a big decision. Every project. It is outside the tolerance levels of whatever has been agreed. So how are you going to take that decision? Who is going to take it? How will that group take that decision? Is it going to be by vote? Is it going to be needs to be unanimous? Is it that the group advises and one person decides? I mean, this is not about right or wrong. It's just about being clear what the process is in advance. Because sometimes in projects you see decisions floating and they're looking for someone to take them. The project manager can't, she or he is not senior enough, they don't have the tolerance level. Oh, and you see this decision floating around the organization, and that's the kiss of death for a project. And if you have something that is very urgent, then again, I mean, let's say the project is failing, and it's clear that it's failing, and you think as an organization that it can't be put right. You might think the best thing to do is to stop. Okay, well, someone has to take that decision. It's not going to take itself. To use a metaphor, the turkeys are not going to vote for Christmas. And so project teams won't take these decisions. And I think in our sector, it is especially difficult because many people, I think, feel a deep emotional attachment to the projects. They know the project beneficiaries, they know the people, they know how important it is. So they want to do more and more work to get it to work. And sometimes you get to the point where you're simply throwing good money after bad money. But that's an extreme example. But I mean, yeah, if the project manager is not performing and she or he needs to be changed, again, these are big decisions. But it may be that, for example, there's a big change of scope. Maybe one of your stakeholders said, yeah, I know we said that, but we've really got to change it. We need to add this to the scope. I mean, the project manager has now got two problems. They can't say yes automatically. And unfortunately, very often they do, which is where things go horribly wrong. But they can't say no either because they don't want to upset the stakeholder. And again, the decision floats looking for somebody to take it. And this is where you want a governance group to say, okay, we've had this request. They're an important stakeholder. This is what we know about it. This is the impact of it. What are we going to do? Do we say yes? Do we say no? Do we modify? Do we find some more money to do it? What are we going to do? And it may be that the project manager does some work in advance of a governance structure meeting, maybe with one of the people to prepare something. Okay, fine, no problem there. You might prepare options, okay, but the decision needs to be taken. And not taking it won't make the problem go away. Not taking difficult decisions or major decisions just means that the problems get bigger, more complex, and more urgent. So this is why governance is important. I think these are the key functions. So what do you think? Does that is that your experience? Is it? I mean, would you add anything to that? What do you feel? And I can't hear anything at all, Mahmoud. I'm looking in the chat. No, there's still no sound. Something's happened with the sound, Mahmoud, because I could hear you very clearly before. Okay, well, I'll carry on. But any questions, any thoughts, you can put them in the chat. Okay, so this is a little look at what it is. And then, of course, the question, how do we do it? I mean, again, there are lots of terminologies here. These are the two most common in the profession of project management. Now, whether we call something a steering group, whether we call it a reference group, whatever, okay. If it's a group, let's call it a board. If it's one person, let's call it a sponsor. Now, you may want to adapt that in your organizations. That's okay. But if you want to learn more about these things, these are the terms that you have to use. The functions are exactly the same. There's no difference. It's not that the sponsor's doing one thing and the board is doing something different. No, you're doing exactly the same. You're doing this. It's just how is that going to happen? And if it's a small project, well, maybe a sponsor is fine. The risk is if it's a really big project that it's too much or they don't have time. And then another question that people ask: does every project need a board? Well, no, not at all. I mean, it's just you need to work out the best way to do it in your context. But for example, I've seen um, cases where you might have a board covering several projects, smaller projects, and then a large project might get its own board. And but again, go back to the point. The focus is this: how is this going to happen? And so in our sector, I do see many groupings. I'm trying to use the words carefully, which are steering groups, steering committees, that sort of thing. And most of the time, they are talking shops. Not always, but they are not doing this. And if this isn't happening, think about the risks to the project. Project manager can't get support. The wrong people are representative, or some people are not represented. There's no clear ownership, poor accountability. The project may be steering itself, and important decisions are not getting taken. So this is actually really quite important. So these are the two most common mechanisms. But then, of course, that's easy to say. But how do you get the structure, whether it's a sponsor or a board, how do you get it to engage? And so here are my top tips. And engagement is massively important. I see project managers almost ignore the board. Well, that's not going to help very much. I see project managers do an absolute minimum. That's not going to help either. I think it's if I'm a project manager, I would try to have individual catch-ups with my board members. Hello, Mahmoud. I'm back again. Okay, so I'll carry on. And my apologies there, the connection went for a second. And part of this engagement that I think it's really important is also understanding people's motivations. I mean, if you've got a sponsor or board members, they're also people. So what motivates them? Why are they there? What are they interested in? How is this going to help them? And welcome back, Mahmoud.
Sorry.
No,
It's
no
my
problem
connection.
at all. No problem at all. Okay, so all I was saying, Mahmoud, is that under engagement, I think it's important to think about um, the board members or your sponsor. They're individuals, they're people. So what motivates them? Why are they there? What are their interests? So, and that can really help. And then, and this sounds really stupid, but how much do they know about their role? I have seen a lot of cases where somebody is told, you're on the board, but nobody says what the job is, what's the role. So, surprise, surprise, they're not able to do it very well. And communicate, communicate, communicate. I think it is so important. It's almost make sure that you never want a board or a sponsor to be asking for more information or to feel they don't have enough to take decisions. And then I think it's really important. You can plan the stages, and we're going to come back to this, and you can plan decision gates. So these can be your moments for the governance structure to meet. And then if you understand their motivations, you can tailor the documentation. I think very often project managers focus on the production of information, which is great, but you also need to think about the consumption of information. What does your board member want? What do they want to see? How much? Do they want a 25-page report every month? Probably not. But what do they want? And understanding that is, I think, really important, because I've seen cases where both the board members and the project manager, like, we're in this sort of ping pong around information, and both sides are unhappy. So I need more information about this, and the project manager says, "Well, I gave you this information. You didn't do anything." And actually, it's just about sitting down and working out, well, what do they want? And you may not be perfect, and you may need to adjust it. Okay, but there's no point just dumping huge amounts of information on them, because they won't read it, and you'll also probably make them feel, inadequate, that they should be reading it, but they don't have time. So that's not a great way to start a meeting. So these are my top tips. Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear now, Ma.
Yeah. Can I say something about the governor? Yeah, about the governor. I was going to say two things, which actually related to this slide too. First, I mean, project manager actually should not sit and relax. Depending, there is a project governor will take decision and will the owner. A project manager has something to do. He's the responsible about daily work of implementing the project. The board or whatever code governor will look at maybe when a decision need to be taken. If it's not within the what we call the tolerance of project manager. That's what I was going to say. Project manager should not sit and relax. He has the governor and will take care of everything.
Oh no.
The other things I was going to say.
Right.
Yeah. And the other thing, the governor should not really look at the project manager. They are sitting in the top of him or her and just watching what they're doing. They have, as you said, the responsibility and duty to do things, not to monitor and control the project manager, but at least to do their job. Which it come back here to decision, get decision. I think project manager and the government board should work in the get decision when the decision is belong to the governor, not to the project manager. There are some decisions should be taken by the project manager, and he or she should not come to the board. That's absolutely daily work, and if it's within his tolerance.
I have seen cases. Well, no, I've seen most of the time the project manager might be part of the board, but they are not decision. They can't take decisions.
This is absolutely what I was going to say.
Yeah. So they participate, if you like, but they don't decide. And I completely agree with you. I mean, what I would add is that I think that it's important. No, let me say this another way. I've seen boards who say, "Oh, we're really busy. We're very busy. We'll meet when there's a problem. You just tell us." The problem with that is, in my experience, is that if there's a problem, so if it's a short project, I don't suppose it matters very much, but if it's a long project going over 2 or 3 years, a board, it's a group of people, they're humans. And if the only time you meet is to talk about problems, it's very difficult to get a productive atmosphere going if you only ever talk about problems. It's just difficult. So I think it's really important to have regular meetings, and we're going to come back to that in a moment.
And the same thing for communication. Sometimes actually it's good to communicate, and actually truly sometimes we had problem with them because they came back, we were not informed. It's really a big issue there, true.
Yeah.
And overdue communication with the board sometimes really create an issue too. So I go to what you have said actually. Uh, yesterday I was telling somebody, I wish I owned the pharmacists who do medicine, so I could create what you call it, a bullet. Somebody just can swear it, and they have all the issue. They can resolve it. You keep communicating, keep informed, and then when there is a meeting, oh, you had not informed, but I had informed you. I mean, like for the last
Yeah.
2 years, I'm saying there is a deficit in there. This is, I'm talking about really a specific problem we had just yesterday. I kept telling you in my assessment for the last 2 years, there is a deficit. Please
Yeah.
coordinate with the relevant. Now we are saying, oh, we just noticed. So sometimes communication, yes, but sometimes it's really it will help a project manager and everybody. We
Yeah.
go to the RACI, we call it role and responsibility.
Yeah. Well, what I think it raises two things. It's about roles and responsibilities, so you're right, but I think it's also about escalation. And you get this, I mean, let's say, for example, I'm trying to, you do some evaluation and you realize there's a problem in this project. Clearly, first of all, you talk to the project manager and she or he, yeah, okay, whatever, but they don't do anything. And nothing happens for 3 months or 4 months. And you go back and you check and it's still the same. Now, this is the sort of point where you say, well, unless the project manager's got a really good reason, actually, there's no point. It's just repeating the conversation. This is where something can be escalated to the board. But then people need to know who is on the board and what the roles are and so on. I mean, and I actually think that, it is linked to issue management and how the project is managing issues, because I actually think that, because it's about decisions, that the board is clearly going to have to be involved in some of the more significant risk management and issue management areas, because the project manager won't have the tolerance level. So no, I mean, I think what you're saying is absolutely right. And you mentioned communication, and actually going back to last week on the commitment curve, I think this model is really helpful because at the beginning of the project, most board members are down here somewhere. They don't really know anything about the project. I mean, it might not be zero. Okay, that's fair enough, but they don't know a lot. But then as a project manager, these board members are really critical internal stakeholders. So what are you going to do? What concrete activities are you going to take to move them up the curve? And you have to, as we saw last week, you've got to keep doing this activity. You can't just stop, because if you do, then people can fall off the chart completely, and then you end up with a poor understanding and negative perception. And you really don't want board members to have a negative perception. So I think this model is actually really helpful for thinking about how we're going to engage with our board members. So I've got a board member who understands the issues. Fantastic, great, really good. What am I going to do to move them up to the next stage? Because if I don't do anything, they're going to start going back down the curve. So I think this model is really helpful in that sense. And again, as I said, I want to link it back to the stuff we were doing a couple of weeks ago on Agile, because, if we put a decision gate at the end of every stage, we now have a moment for the governance structure or the sponsor to come together. And we can both review what has happened and we can look forward at the next period. And because you're not talking 3 years or 4 years, which is so long, it's just difficult. You might be talking over the next 2 months. It leads to a much more grounded conversation, and the project manager can raise any issues or problems and get the benefit of the board's support as well. And then I keep going on about these concrete tasks, whether it's communication or whatever. What communications tasks, what engagement tasks are you going to do? Okay, well, these become part of our workload for the next part of the project. So again, we can link it to this idea of a stage within our project, and whether we say that stage is a month or 3 months or 6 months or whatever. But okay, the moment we start thinking about what are those concrete tasks to move a stakeholder up the curve, what are the concrete tasks? Planning the board meetings, making sure that the information is ready. Once I've got those concrete tasks, then I can plan them appropriately and make sure they're resourced. So that's really what I wanted to say around governance, actually. I'm trying to maybe demystify it a little bit and make it a little bit, what's the right word? Just practical. And how does that sound to you, Mahmoud? What does, how do, how,
I think, yeah. Do you hear me?
Yeah, I can, loud and clear.
Yeah. John, about this governor, I think it fit perfect during this time, the COVID-19, because everybody working remotely, even your management, and it's good to have this board and whatever we call steering committee, because it's easy to meet, and I think to me it's working perfect. Because during normal hour, like when there is everybody at office, it's hardly and difficult to bring people together, honestly. But this COVID-19 actually make it easy and simple for me.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good opportunity for project manager to use this opportunity to have at least board or steering committee meeting remotely. It worked perfect. So, but what you said, honestly, I have to go back and listen to it again. You talked about all issue I could meet from governor perspectives. Yep, I would do that. With my limited experience, whatever you called it, talking about this stakeholder management and now governor, and okay, COVID-19 forced us to go Asia. It's really what I will say is the way to implement the project. There's no way to implement the project except through these directions. Stakeholder engagement and stakeholder management and governor. Regardless, governor, sometimes I look at governor, not only a governor, I am as a project manager, I am governor to look at my project management team too. So this is how I look at it.
I think that it's, I think those governance functions need to happen up and down through the organization. I mean, arguably they need to happen at a portfolio level as well. It's just being clear, how is it going to happen? And so if it's a project manager doing it, well, they've probably got line management authority, whereas project governance might not have line management authority. So, and that's why it can become sometimes a little bit messy. And the solution is just to be clear about, okay, what decisions can be taken by whom? And if you're clear about that, and you may get it wrong, you may need to modify, okay, fine. But if you're clear, or as clear as you can be, project manager, she can take these decisions. Anything bigger, this is the mechanism. It just makes life easier.
Yep. So, John, if you turn off the, I think I can tell you my experience 5 years ago. I mean, not actually 10 years ago with one project. Yeah.
Yes, of course. Hold on just one moment.
Becoming more politics there.
Okay, hold on.